Hello and welcome to Truth Be Known, stories about how modern data leaders seek truth in an uncertain world. Today's episode features an interview with Robert Brown, the Senior Director of Research for the Venture Forward initiative at GoDaddy. This is his 13th year at GoDaddy, having started as Director of Database Marketing. Prior to GoDaddy, Robert served as Director of Pulte Homes for 9 years. On this episode, Robert talks about tiering data for smarter decisioning, developing intrinsic motivation in employees, and being a successful steward of data and insights.
Truth Be Known is brought to you by Talend, a leader in data integration and data governance. Talend enables data and analytics leaders to deliver healthy data across their organization to drive business outcomes. Talend Data Fabric is the only platform that seamlessly combines a suite of data integration and governance capabilities to ensure data is complete, clean, uncompromised, and readily available. Learn more at talend.com. Talend.com.
And now, please enjoy this conversation between Robert Brown, the Senior Director of Research for the Venture Forward initiative at GoDaddy, and your host, Rob Norman.
Welcome to Truth Be Known. I'm Rob, and I'm joined today by Robert Brown. Robert, it is great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Rob, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. So I'd love to know a bit more about how you ended up where you are today as Senior Director of Research and Insights for Venture Forward. So I can see from your background that you started out as a project manager at Del Webb. You were a director at Pulte Homes for, I think, 9 years. But I'd love to, if you could just tell us a bit about that journey and how it led you to where you are today.
Sure. Well, Rob, I've always been interested in data, even back to when I was a kid. This is back in the 70s. Looking at the back of baseball cards and the statistics that would be on the back of baseball cards, or going through box scores in the sports page, seeing how different players were performing. And I've just always had some kind of intrinsic interest in numbers. And that ended up manifesting during my years in college when I was really interested in politics and political science, and gravitated more towards the quantitative side of that particular field. And so as I was going through college and grad school, I ended up in these more quant programs that really gave me the training and the expertise to be a careful and successful steward of data and insights. And that manifested ultimately in roles initially in my career in market research, doing quantitative and qualitative kinds of studies to understand customer interests, wants, behaviors, needs, those sorts of things. Really my career has evolved over time. I wouldn't say I started off with this outcome in mind as I was going through my journey, but in being a conscientious steward of my career and really following my own internal true north, it led me to these different roles where data has always been an important component of being successful in the particular space that I was occupying at the time. So whether that was in home building with Del Webb and Pulte, or ultimately here at GoDaddy, I've always been in and around data. Have been able to use those intrinsic interests of mine to further my career.
And what do you think, like, that intrinsic interest in data, what do you put it down to? Like,
truth. I think fundamentally, at my age now, I've had plenty of moments to reflect on kind of who I am and what is it that really motivates me. And certainly I'm always been passionate about and like an objective truth of knowing what really is the relationship between two different events, or why is something successful versus unsuccessful. Of course, people can apply their own biases to those observations, but I've just always really been interested in knowing a fact. And so if the data would indicate that, going back to the analogy of the sports cards, if this player is better than that player, here's all of the evidence that backs up that particular judgment or assertion, that's always felt most comfortable to me. That it's less ambiguous as to whether or not player X is better than player Y, or applying it here to what we're doing today with venture forward, whether or not micro businesses make a difference in the communities in which they exist. And so, it's one thing for a marketer to be able to say and wrap a package around a particular point of view, and say, this is our opinion of something, but it's something else for me entirely to be able to prove it, and demonstrate it through data, and kind of go through that scientific method of exploration and testing and validation, and repeating the kinds of experiments that lead to those kinds of outcomes and conclusions.
And now that you're at Venture Forward, that is a market. It's a research-led initiative from GoDaddy.
Well, so initially, Venture Forward was created at the senior most levels of GoDaddy, and the intent and the purpose for this was to see if there was some there with the insights and the information that we had in furtherance of GoDaddy's mission, right? And so GoDaddy's place is to really radically shift the global economy towards life-sustaining independent ventures, right? Like that's what we produce and put out to the market, to understand who we are and what we're trying to do. And we've used, like most companies, the traditional ways up until Venture Forward to communicate who we were and who we were trying to support and serve. Venture Forward was conceived as a new lens, a new tool, a new voice for GoDaddy to have influence with or inform a community of people who could advocate on behalf of the everyday entrepreneur who are running these micro businesses. And so that community consists of people like policymakers, academics who are creating new insights about economic development and democratizing opportunity for people across the country, journalists who write about these disadvantaged communities or new ways that people are trying to approach their own personal financial success. And so we didn't know whether or not going into this, our data was going to support this or not. Right. We went in with a naive perspective. We knew what we had. We knew who we were. We knew who our customers were. But we didn't know if there were these real world connections that could be valuable to that community that we were really interested in trying to reach through Venture Forward. So they tapped me on the shoulder several years ago. At the time, I was running our data science team for GoDaddy. And they tapped me on the shoulder because they knew I had been working on some things that could potentially be used to drive this initiative forward. And they said, "Hey, Robert, is there something we could do here? Can you help us to figure this out?" And it was a blank slate, kind of wide open challenge, but it was super exciting to have that opportunity to create something new within a fairly established organization that became a new way that we could support our customers and, frankly, our shareholders.
It's a really fascinating initiative that GoDaddy have created, and it's really interesting to see how this initiative supports the overall mission of GoDaddy, and it really kind of takes it helps to elevate GoDaddy's mission, perhaps at the starting point of providing domain names, to now a mission centered around how to drive and support micro businesses, which are at the core of so many economies and make such a huge difference to the economy and success of so many nations. When you were presented with that thesis or idea and said, "Hey, Robert, could you please explore this and see where it leads," and that can be somewhat a classic request of a data scientist. Like, we've got a kernel of an idea here. Could you run with it? So how did you take it, and how did you run with it?
Yeah. Well, I think first thing is it was important for me to know what I had subject matter expertise in and what I didn't have subject matter expertise in. I am not an economist. I'm not a demographer. And those are important aspects or facets of the micro business economy, and its effect outside of GoDaddy's economic performance, right? So first was just to take inventory of what could I credibly bring to the table. And what I could credibly bring to the table is the identification of these micro businesses, where they are, who's operating them, kind of, the time series and the historical view of the evolution of these micro businesses. But we had to partner with other people who had subject matter expertise. And so our way of approaching this was to find subject matter experts in this space, and we found a couple at University of Iowa and Arizona State, where there are lead researchers here who've really spent a lot of time reading the literature and contributing to the literature around things like democratization of opportunity, the the digital divide, right, and the effect that that has on people's economic health, on their social well-being, and those sorts of things, right? So we brought those individuals, those researchers, into the Venture Forward initiative, and we handed them the data, and we didn't try to bias them in any direction, one way or the other. We really just asked them the question: Here's what we have. Here's what we know. Can you help us to see if there is any relationship between what we have and what we know and what you all study and what you live day to day in your careers? They took that back. They bumped it up against a variety of data sets that they look at regularly, whether it's census data, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, American Community Survey data, et cetera, and found that there were consistent and strong relationships between what we knew and what we saw as a company and what they were observing in the course of their work that they were doing. And so that was the key, really, to ignite the engine for Venture Forward. There was plenty of other things that unlocked us along the way, and I'll be happy to talk about those. But that's really how we got started, to prove that there was a there from a Venture Forward perspective.
And just the confluence of those elements of those sources of data, the contributing data from GoDaddy, I think was the active number of active, inactive websites of micro businesses. Was that the proprietary data that, in wider terms, that was contributing to the trifecta, if you like, of that statistical data coming and demographic data that you were pulling together?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rob. So part of the reason why I mentioned that the executives sort of tapped me on the shoulder, because they knew I was working on some things that could be relevant to the objective of Venture Forward, and specifically the thing that I was working on with my team of data scientists at the time was creating this new dimension in our data set that we ended up calling Venture, not Venture Forward. So we created this new object within our data that stitched together observations of how people were using their domains, whether they're using GoDaddy products and services on top of that or not. We didn't care so much about. What we really wanted to get at, what we were trying to solve with the data science team that I was running at the time, was understanding what it is that our customers are trying to solve with the products and services that they are buying or licensing from GoDaddy. Historically, what we've had here is a bunch of independent data and observations about transaction behavior, utilization behavior, but they all lived in silos adjacent to each other. And so the innovation from a venture perspective was for our team to kind of stitch this together into a graph, essentially, that would explain, okay, Rob Norman could be a customer of ours, and Rob has 4 different domains in his portfolio, but really 3 of those domains are all in service of the same outcome. And so there's plenty of signals and data that's available to us, but nobody had really looked at it at that point. And we knew, and I knew just through my own career, starting off in database marketing and customer marketing, and really trying to be able to position our products and services most effectively with our customers, that was a missing lens that we had with regards to connecting with our customers, that everything else just would come across as maybe an undifferentiated product offer. But if you can really understand that what this individual is trying to do is run a restaurant or develop a a bar and grill, for example. Like knowing what those outcomes are that the customer is trying to achieve makes our ability to personalize and rationalize and contextualize the next thing that would be important for them to reach that goal and objective. So that venture object really became the kernel of what we have used for venture forward, and that's what we've been sharing with the public here. Of course, anonymized and aggregated, and all of those sorts of things to protect our customers' identities. But in the aggregate, this is the kind of information that we're making public to people through venture forward.
And what kind of impact have you seen this research provide and make?
So our target audience, as described a little bit earlier, is really kind of policymakers, academics and researchers, and journalists who are interested in economic development across the country. And so what ends up happening in the very early days, we had an opportunity to meet with a member of the Obama Commerce Department and talk to him a little bit about what we had and what we were finding. And we got a true North Star in that conversation with him. His name's Jim Hawk. And one of the things that he said to us was, at Commerce, we couldn't create policy for those things that we couldn't see. And so
Mm.
we knew that there was this kind of behavior, this micro business sort of behavior going on in the economy, but we couldn't see it in any of our traditional measurement that we have, even at the federal level, right? Because so many of these micro businesses are unregistered in terms of LLCs or EINs or any of those kinds of things where the government would start to pick it up, right? Side hustles, side gigs, really small businesses that are bringing in, a few $1,000s a month. Oftentimes, these are just flying under the radar of what policymakers are using to create policy. And so when we had that conversation with Jim and we were able to share this with him, that really gave us the momentum that we needed to reach out to the audiences that we really cared about. And we determined at that point that we really need to get in front of people like mayors or economic policy directors and share this with them. And what we find is we get the same response from them that we got at the federal level. We knew something was going on. We didn't know how much of it was going on in our community, and we certainly didn't have any line of sight into the broader effect that these micro businesses are having in our community. And so this has just become then a self-fulfilling initiative where we make these local policymakers aware of what we have. They start to attach what's important to them and what they're trying to accomplish in their city. New Orleans is trying to do something entirely different than Las Vegas is trying to do, but they all care about creating these more diverse economies, these more resilient economies, and these more equitable economies, just in different flavors. And so that's really what the venture forward data and the work that we've been doing has unlocked across the country, frankly.
It's a fascinating initiative because it really is a virtuous circle for GoDaddy in the sense that there's a true societal and economic benefit of making this data available and combining it with the statistical data and providing this to policymakers that supports the micro businesses. And in the same way, that same kernel of data that you described is also enabling GoDaddy to accurately provide services to those micro businesses as and when they need them. So there's this whole virtuous circle happening. And I also noticed that this has expanded beyond the US. And in fact, you've partnered with the University of Kent in the UK, and you've started the same initiative in the UK. Is this then sort of a model that GoDaddy and your team are effectively driving out now to the core markets that GoDaddy operates in?
Potentially, certainly we went to UK consciously. UK is an important market for GoDaddy and its business, but we didn't know. Just as we didn't really know in the US whether or not there was going to be a there. We didn't know if this was going to translate into UK and what's happening there. Different culture, different policies, right? Different needs in different societies. And so, we went into this not knowing and not predetermining that there was anything we were going to publish or anything we were going to try to promote around our UK initiative. But, in working with George at Kent Business School, they were able to replicate those results. And so that was really interesting to us. And, I think speaks to a more universal truth about what role micro businesses play for people, not just Americans, not just Brits or, folks across the UK, but people. And so, I think it remains to be seen as to whether or not there are other markets that we're going to expand to. It's certainly a possibility that we will continue to push forward, but we were very gratified to see that we got the opportunity to present these results at Westminster, and actually meet with members of Parliament. And the UK team is off and running in trying to do the same sorts of things there that we're trying to do here again, which is influence the way that policymakers approach this lever of economic development, and to try to be as inclusive as possible to reap the benefits that cascade from this type of activity.
Yeah, it's truly a fascinating way of how data science is being applied to drive not just business impact but societal impact in the same way, which is arguably pioneering and relatively unique at this moment in time. You've been with GoDaddy for, I think, 12 years, your 13th year, which is an incredible journey. And I should imagine from a data perspective, GoDaddy's been on that data journey, and you've witnessed that and had a front row seat throughout your tenure. I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about what that data journey has been like for GoDaddy and yourself, and how the company's evolved to become truly data driven as it is today.
Sure. Well, so yes, I started here in January 2010, and at the time we were still a private company led by the founder. And it was evident during my interview process and from day one that data was viewed as an asset at GoDaddy, and that started right from the very top, from Bob Parsons himself to basically his chief operating officer, who hired me and who was my first boss here. Uh, Data has always been core to what we do in our decision making processes, in our engagement with our customers. Now, of course, we weren't as sophisticated and as evolved today as we were then. I mean, that was 13 years ago. We've grown and learned along the way, but the through line, in my experience at GoDaddy, has always been around data. And what I've really seen is we've done a lot more investing into data, both in terms of the human capital that are being brought to bear, as well as the technology that we're deploying to make us a reliable data shop. So we now have a chief data officer here. We have a team. I don't even know the size of the analytics team anymore. I was in analytics for a long period of time. In the last year, I've been over here in the marketing organization running this venture forward research project. But there's dozens, if not 100, analysts here, and the connection between our analyst community and the rest of our business units, they're centralized, right? And the reason why they're centralized is that it allows us to create standards, best practices, allows them to learn from each other, and it really creates that sense of community. But they're franchised out into the business units so that they're invested in and embedded with the people who are going to be ultimately the consumers of that data. And so, that's our approach. And we've gone through different versions of this. We've certainly had a decentralized organization for a while of much smaller teams, to now kind of having a larger, more centralized organization that's really trying to get us to the next generation, the next level of leveraging data to drive our business forward.
one of the hot topics, or one of the hot trends I've noticed in data science is the number of roles that are available today for data engineering seems to have exploded to the point where there seems to be more roles and more opportunity for data engineers than data scientists. And I'd be interested to know the experience that GoDaddy went through and how you address data engineering as a necessary underpinning of being able to drive the right data analysis and do the quality data science. Some companies are finding that they've sort of got ahead of their skis and have hired the data science and the data analysts without having the data infrastructure and the data piping and the data engineering behind it, and are now sort of catching up with that. How have you experienced that at GoDaddy? Is it something that you've been in lockstep with, or you've had to address as you've gone through the journey?
Yeah. Well, in the early days, it was DBAs, right? And so, those individuals were highly leveraged. They were worth their weight in gold. Some of those DBAs probably felt they were loved to death, just because there was so much demand for their skills and their services, because everybody had big visions for how they wanted to apply data in their day to day activities, right? Whether that is product development, whether that is marketing, whether that is, kind of business strategy, whatever. It all stems from having reliable data. And all of that data was being curated by our DBAs. Fast forward to 2022, and it's data engineers that are in that same sort of position. And in our organization, they're side by side with the analytics community, who are really the interface into the business and the operation, right? So it's not the engineers, it's the analysts who are really the ones who stitch together, what is this data, what can you do with this data, what can you not do with this data, and that is really a joint venture with our engineering organization. And so we've got, a robust team of folks who are working on things like moving our data to the cloud, getting us off of a lot of the old legacy systems that we had been using. And all of that flows through our data engineering organization, and continues to be a key part of our maturation process. So, for example, the data engineers do own kind of the data tiering process that we go through, right? Where, if data is in this particular tier, it has these sorts of service level agreements around it. It has this sort of reliability expectation around it, versus if it's in some other data tier where it's more sandbox kind of data, where we don't want to stop people from using sandbox data, right? Where it may not have had a whole lot of QA behind it. It may not have a whole lot of history behind it. But as long as you know what you're getting into when you're looking at particular data, then you can take that data as far as it is supported with the parameters that go with that particular tier. And so that's what I think our engineering team is really helping us to continue to move forward, right? Not letting perfect be the enemy of good, but also protecting the business from getting out in front of its skis, and making calls on data that may not be as reliable as it really needs to be to make those sorts of investment decisions or strategic decisions.
Yeah, and it's fundamental for the success of the business that there's a as much attention paid to the data engineering and data cleaning and being able to trust the data that you're working with, as it is taking the business needs and requirements and looking to provide analytics back to the business. Just out of interest, do you make a distinction between data scientists and data analysts, and do you have those as distinct functions, roles, and responsibilities, or do you group the data scientist and the data analyst as one function and role and responsibility?
They're cousins with each other here at GoDaddy. Certainly, there is some analysis that our data scientists will do, and there is some, light data science that our analysts will do. But they're definitely different roles. They have different job codes and different growth trajectories within the organization. So we have distinct analysts and we have distinct data scientists. They're in the same organization as each other because again they are cousins with each other, and we don't want to get uh, too diverse or diverged in the ways that we're leveraging the data and communicating the data. But absolutely, we have teams of machine learning practitioners. We have teams of kind of econometric type of modeling individuals here, and then we have straight business analysts. And there's room for all of that here, and so we don't try to force any one individual into one of those particular buckets. But we certainly do try to hire for those kinds of skills depending on what the primary accountability for the role will be.
And you've had extensive experience managing those teams and driving teams to high performance. And so I'd love to get a sense from you in terms of how you lead and manage teams to high performance. How do you think about that? And what are the key tenets for you to deliver teams that are really high performing?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the individual, not even the outcomes necessarily that those individuals are delivering. I personally think it's very important as a manager to be invested in the career of the people I'm managing. And so it's been important to me, for example, to have, these extended one-on-one conversations with people that have been on my teams over the years, not just during review cycles, right, but along the way, and setting aside work during those particular conversations and talking about them. What's working well for them? What are their aspirations? How can I be different in terms of the way that I'm engaging with them? What do they need more of or less of from me? And I found that first builds a lot of loyalty with the people that have been on my teams, but it's also just made me a better manager, knowing that this individual is really looking to expand the languages that they can write code against, or this individual is really looking to get an opportunity to move into a different part of the business. And so, to the extent that there are natural opportunities to present those moments to these individuals, if I don't ask these sorts of questions, then I miss them. I miss those opportunities. And so to me, it's always started with that. Um, of course, outcomes are important, right? And delivering for the business and for shareholders, got to show up. And so, to me, the second part has always really been to know what is it that is important to the business, and what in the outcomes that we're trying to deliver, whether it's revenue goals, whether it's satisfaction goals, whether it's customer engagement sorts of goals, and to use my own experience and my own understanding of the path to get to those kinds of outcomes to create these new moments for the team to show up. And so this venture object that I was talking about, nobody really asked me to do that, but I knew that it would be an important and valuable lever for us as a company to do the sorts of things that we've been talking about during our conversation today. And so we put some time and we got some agreement from others to invest some of that, our team's time, into building these kinds of solutions and not just being reactive to the transient asks of the day, right? Because you can get yourself consumed with answering questions from individuals, but abstracting yourself periodically from the workaday questions of how many did this or how much of this happened, and really understanding why they're even having to ask those questions to begin with, or what questions aren't they asking that they really ought to have the answers to begin with, I think gets you and has gotten my teams ahead of the curve in kind of throughout my years here, and frankly in the place I was before here. So it's a little bit of trying to peek around corners on behalf of the team, and knowing where leverage is possible and where needs are evident, and trying to fill those gaps before somebody comes and asks you to do it.
From a practical point of view, how do you go about actually implementing that? Do you, with your team, set an OKR and carve out time to be able to allow the team to step back, or is it another technique that you use to enable them to really step back from the business and peek around corners?
Yeah, certainly. OKRs is a great way to do it. And you set these markers well outside of the reach of the individuals who are trying to get to those particular goals, and stretch folks. And I like to talk to folks on my team that goals and objectives from an MBO perspective. If all you're doing, and if you always reach all of your goals, you probably left something on the table. And so trying to always make it not frustrating for individuals, right? Because people like to have accomplishment, but you have to recognize those accomplishments in increments along the way, and take that step back and say, here's where we are today. Here's where we were 6 months ago. Here's where we were last year. And make sure that people are seeing and recognizing that improvement, that innovation, that change that's being produced by the team along the way, and not make it a big waterfall for folks, or some sort of unobtainium that is always hanging out there, but you can just never reach. So like that is a for sure a way that I have tried to approach these more I don't know, esoteric opportunities, versus just straight up produce this amount of poundage.
The word that comes to mind throughout everything you've just been saying is motivation. How you're developing within your team members that sense of motivation, because you're connecting the why and the purpose to what they're doing, to their own longer term goals. When you talked about the career conversations and where they want to go, you talked about how you're connecting the why of the purpose of the company, so they understand how what they're doing fits into it. And in addition to that, you're talking about how you're creating goals that are have the right tension between stretch and attainability. And that's such a tricky balance to hit in when setting goals, because yeah, you put a goal that's too much of a moonshot, too far out of reach, and people can give up and raise their hands and say, I'm never going to hit that. Or you can have them working within their comfort zone, and then that isn't motivating either. So it's really interesting how you're using a number of different approaches to ultimately, I would argue, to develop that intrinsic motivation within your team members that leads them to high performance.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to summarize it, Rob. And if I think about the Venture Forward initiative, right, we have a couple of analysts who are dedicated to this initiative. I work with them every day. And we have a couple of folks from the go to market team on Venture Forward. And if I were to just take a step back and think about what it is that we're trying to accomplish here, we're trying to get policymakers to change the way that they're running their cities. Well, if you said that to somebody as the goal, well, okay, that sounds lofty, but holy cow, how am I ever going to do that, right? I mean, so many things are out of my control. I can't, I can't write the check, I can't write the law, or I can't create the program, but we can influence it, right? And we can demonstrate along the way that we're getting the kinds of traction that leads to these sorts of outcomes. And certainly we do have, markers and observations of these outcomes occurring. But to get to the kind of scale that will really make a difference for the everyday entrepreneur, and then ultimately, for GoDaddy and our shareholders and those sorts of things, it's going to take time. And so, keeping the team that is dedicated to something as lofty as this, motivated and observing the wins. It's some of it is operational in nature, of like, hey, we just now are doing this part of our job a lot more efficiently, a lot better, with a lot more consistency. But because the goal is so lofty, there are so many different ways that these individuals, and including myself, can attach to what it is that we're trying to do. So that's where, to your point, from a motivation perspective of joining and understanding of what really drives the folks on the team with the components that will lead to the ultimate goal and objective for venture forward, there's plenty of room for people to really find fulfillment in the work that they're doing while still delivering the results that we're accountable for.
It's also how you're creating purpose, and purpose with a big P, and that's the lofty societal economic impact change. But also how you create the little p, which is how is what I did this day and this week and this project, how did I help out my coworker or my teammate and the project that I completed? How does that create little p purpose? How is that connected to the big P? Which is one of, I think, the three aspects of what creates the motivation. You've got purpose, you've got mastery, which is another area which would be interesting to discuss in terms of how you're helping your teams get to mastery. Data science is a journey. It's such a vast space. It's almost impossible to learn it all. And the third is autonomy. For mastery, how do you support your team to develop their skills, to become better data scientists, better data engineers, better data analysts?
Well, certainly application, right? In my perspective, you have to give people an opportunity to fail. Of course, you want to give them that opportunity to fail or succeed, in safe environments where, if where they're struggling is in the translation of their outcome into uh, insights or presentations, right? Well, start with a smaller group, right? Don't put them in front of the CEO the first time as they're trying to explain what it is that they're trying to do or what they've learned and discovered, right? Don't put them on the big stage those first moments, but give them those moments in smaller increments, smaller doses with a more comfortable audience, for them to practice and learn and give them that feedback. And so that's the second part, is the feedback, right? And I personally had a lot of managers who haven't given me a lot of feedback along the way. And okay, yeah, you get through your day and nobody gave you any criticism or critique of what you did. And so that feels comfortable, but it doesn't make you better. And so how one phrases that critique, of course, matters. But that it's even delivered, I think, is a big part of growing people and making them more expert in what they're trying to do, and telling them, like, okay, yep, that's one way to do it. Here's a different way to potentially do it where I've found some success before, without bashing somebody over the head and saying, okay, here's the way, I want you to follow this template. um, you know uh, to me, that doesn't teach people. That just turns them into automatons or robots, right? Of like following somebody else's um, dictate or even personal style. So the feedback, I think, is an important part, giving them those opportunities to demonstrate a new skill or practice a new skill. And then I think the third thing is to step back and not try to control the individual so much, and maybe just give them a broad target of like, hey, would you be interested in, or we talked about this, I know you're interested in exploring whatever this technique, this outcome, this segment of the project that we're trying to work on. And I'm not going to say anything with regards to what you really need to try to do, other than maybe saying, here's the goal that we want to get at, and let them have some creativity and let them do some experimentation within that kind of broad framework of what that outcome is that we're trying to get to. Because I don't know everything, right? Sure, I've got more experience, or I've got a lot of experience under my belt at this point in my career, but I don't know everything, and I don't want to pretend that I do. And so I love to learn from individuals as well, and by giving them these opportunities to explore something that maybe I don't understand myself.
Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. It's intrinsically what drives motivation and high performing teams. And speaking about teams and team performance, what's the best piece of career advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, um, yeah. After 25 years of working, I've gotten a lot. And my gut reaction is the single best thing that somebody ever told me when I first started working was, Robert, you get 6 silver bullets in your career, and if you're running around, shooting bullets, dying on hills, along the way all the time, people are going to tune you out, right? And I came out of the shoots in my career raring to go, right? I was super energetic, super motivated. I thought I was ready to conquer the world, but I was wearing people out. And so the first one was, use your moments of decision making and critical calls that you're going to make judiciously. If you're super passionate about something, that's great, but just know that it's the right hill to die on, or it's the right moment to really put your foot down and say, no, this is the way something needs to be, and it can't always be that way. So that was the early advice that I got, that I found super valuable, and I 25 years later I still think of it, and I still give this advice to other people who come in hot from just getting their degree, or this is their first job, right, where they're raring to go. The second bit of advice that I gotten and still continues to be part of the culture here at GoDaddy is to get out of your comfort zone, and that's a harder one. It's easier to kind of control your tongue, but it's a lot more difficult to put yourself into these situations that you're not accustomed to. Honestly, here being on the phone with you, this is not something that I did a lot during my days running a data science shop, or being a customer marketing leader, or running a prior company's website and e-commerce programs. So talking to the media, talking to policymakers, speaking with mayors, just not something I've been comfortable with. And I knew I was going to do it once I decided to join the Venture Forward team full time, and turn it from a side of my desk initiative to a my full portfolio. And so, it's been great though. It's been great to kind of hear the feedback from the folks that I get a chance to talk to. It's been an opportunity for me to help shape the way that the go to market team is approaching things, because I come from a very quantitative background. They come from a very qualitative background. And so, us coming together into this concentrated mix of experiences and perspectives and talents was not comfortable, initially, but you grow and you learn from it. And now I'm much more comfortable here, and I think I'm a better employee. I think I'm a better operator now than I was a year ago before I was on the team.
Sound advice. Sound advice. It's all about having a growth mindset, and pushing oneself out of one's comfort zone is the way we learn. And that relates back to what you were saying earlier about the opportunity to fail. Failure is how we learn, and mistakes is how we learn. And we typically make those mistakes when we're pushed out of our comfort zones. If we master what we're doing and therefore are within our comfort zones, we can still make mistakes and we can still fail, but they happen less frequently, and therefore we learn less frequently. So that is really sound advice.
Yeah, and our CEO Aman Bhutani has really pushed the experimentation mindset into GoDaddy. Right, he personally is driving that culture and that way of operating. And of course, experimentation comes with failure. Right, if you never fail in an experiment, you're not really experimenting. You're not really reaching. And that manifests in, I think, a variety of ways, whether it's something you're putting in front of customers from an A/B perspective, or whether it's in the way that you personally go about your job, right? Just maybe the way you operate, of like, hey, here's how I'm going to report out on my deliverables, right? I'm going to try this thing, and maybe it's going to drive attachment from the audience, or maybe they're going to say, hey, this is great, but can you change this? Well, in a certain way, that's failure, right? Because you didn't get it exactly right the
Mm.
first time, but now you got something better. And so I'd really try to live that myself. And I really try to encourage that in folks that are on my team.
It's great advice, and it's a great way to close out on the podcast, because that's all we've got time for. Robert, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. If people would like to follow you, get in touch, where are you on social, on LinkedIn, or
Yeah.
also on other platforms?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to reach me. So I'm Robert Brown at GoDaddy. I think it's rxbrown at GoDaddy.com is the email address that's associated with my account there.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Rob, it was great to meet you, by the way. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Great having you on the show.
Truth Be Known is brought to you by Talend, a leader in data integration and data governance. Talend enables data and analytics leaders to deliver healthy data across their organization to drive business outcomes. Talend Data Fabric is the only platform that seamlessly combines a suite of data integration and governance capabilities to ensure data is complete, clean, uncompromised, and readily available. Learn more at talend.com. TALEND.com.